I was standing behind the checkout counter at Ridgeview Mall when I saw them walk into Tessa, Jenna, and Brooke, my old high school friends, the same trio who used to smirk whenever I brought handmade earrings to class for Spirit Week. Their laughter rippled through the polished atrium like a stone skimming water. I felt the old sting of memory, Tessa's eye rolls, Jenna's stage whispers, Brooke's pitying smiles. But this time, something was different. The store surrounding me, 6,000 square feet of reclaimed wood shelving, botanical print wallpaper, and backlit displays, was mine. Every concrete pillar, every brass fixture, every humming LED spotlight. I tightened my grip on the bouquet of silk ribbons I was unpacking and told myself to breathe. Because 5 years earlier, almost to the day, those same girls had called my fledgling Etsy shop a cute little hobby. I remember their exact words, "One day you'll get a real job, M." Their mockingly gentle pats on my shoulder had felt like claws. If you've ever experienced something like this, please hit like and subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31 years old, born and raised in Westbrook, Ohio, a Rust Belt town that smells of rain-wet maple and diesel. Back then, I was the quiet kid who drew mandalas in the margins of math tests and stitched felt foxes after dinner while Dad watched the news. We didn't have much. Mom left when I was 10, bills piled up, and I paid for senior year prom shoes with 2 months of babysitting. Art was my escape. Freshman year of college, I opened an Etsy storefront called Threadlight. I listed my embroidered canvas totes at $15 a piece, snapped photos on my dorm room windowsill, and waited, refreshing the page every hour, for sales that rarely came. By the time I graduated with a BFA and a mountain of student debt, my store had exactly 97 reviews. Not terrible, not life-changing. Then came the layoff. My entry-level design job at a print shop evaporated in a single HR meeting. I packed my cubicle plants into a cardboard box and walked home in December sleet, cheeks numb, heart pounding. Rent was due, the loan collectors were calling, and winter pressed against my apartment windows like a hungry stranger. That night, I cried hard for the first time in years, ugly sobs that shook my shoulders. Yet in that jagged moment, a spark lit up inside me. I dusted off my sewing machine, brewed stale coffee, and stitched until sunrise, leather-trimmed tote prototypes, hand-dyed scarves, laser-cut keychains. My tiny living room became a chaos of fabric bolts and shipping labels. And for the first time, Threadlight felt less like a hobby and more like a lifeline. If this part hit you hard, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done. Orders trickled in, 1 here, 2 there. I wrote thank you notes on recycled cardstock, sealed every box with gold foil stickers, and shared behind-the-scenes reels on Instagram. A Tuesday shout-out from a micro-influencer pushed me to 300 sales in a week. I smiled until my cheeks hurt, but fear lurked, algorithms change, hype dies. I knew I'd need more. Enter Grandma Ruth. She was 82, sharp as peppermint, and the only person who'd never once doubted me. "Make them all believe in you," she said, handing me a wrinkled envelope of savings, $4,000 she'd tucked away since Grandpa's funeral. I argued, I protested, but her blue eyes flashed. Dreams are meant to be cashed in, Emmy. With her seed money, I rented a 400 square foot kiosk at Ridgeview Mall, the same mall where Tessa and the girls spent weekends sipping boba and filming TikToks. I could still hear their voices echoing down the escalators. Etsy's cute, but it's not real retail. Opening week was brutal. Foot traffic was thin, and passers-by eyed my handmade goods like exotic insects. One father whispered, "Too pricey," as he tugged his kid toward the food court. I smiled anyway, retied my apron, and rearranged displays for the 100th time. The breakthrough arrived in the form of Maria Alvarez, a local lifestyle blogger with 75,000 followers. She bought a teal leather tote, snapped a mirror selfie, and captioned it, "Support local artists, this bag is everything." Sales exploded overnight. My phone pinged so relentlessly that I momentarily thought it was glitching. I hired 2 part-time helpers, Liam, a graphic design student, and Noor, a stay-at-home mom who could crochet lace faster than anyone I'd ever seen. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever felt underestimated. Yet success brewed resentment. The kiosk next door, owned by a fast fashion chain, complained that my shoppers clogged the aisle. Security asked me to move my checkout stand 3 inches left. The mall's leasing director hinted that my contract might not renew. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, fear drumming my ribs. I could lose everything. That's when I remembered Grandma's letters. She'd written me one each birthday, storing them in a shoebox. The most recent read, "Play big, even when you feel small." So I did something wild. I filed paperwork to register Threadlight as an LLC, pitched a line of eco-luxury bags to a venture capital incubator, and prayed. The incubator said yes, conditionally. They wanted projections, a flagship location, and proof I could scale. I gulped. Ridgeview Mall had a vacant anchor store, the old department store, 2 floors, escalators, 40,000 square feet of dust and potential. Monthly rent was astronomical. But the manager was desperate. Vacancies were killing foot traffic. I negotiated feverishly, offering a revenue share clause in place of full rent for the first year. They bit. Papers were signed. Liam and Nor screamed. I almost fainted. Grandma Ruth baked cinnamon rolls and said, "Told you so." Construction began at dawn on a frosty Monday. We tore out stained carpet, installed skylights, built workshop stations where customers could watch artisans stitch bags in real time. Word spread. Local news ran a feature on the Etsy girl going brick and mortar. Brooke commented on the video with a clapping emoji. Tessa posted a vague tweet about overnight success being luck. Jenna kept silent. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from if this felt familiar. Launch day arrived like thunder. A queue wrapped around the building, mothers, college kids, retirees clutching coffee. I cut the ribbon with Grandma's sewing shears. Cameras flashed. I walked inside and felt the ceiling fly away. Sunlight poured over rows of color-blocked displays and scent of cedar. My lungs filled with something like possibility, or maybe justice. Revenue eclipsed projections by 280% the first quarter. Investors doubled down. By year 2, we opened a second location in Chicago, then Seattle. I hired marginalized crafters, paid living wages, and launched a scholarship fund for young artisans. Threadlight was no longer a kiosk on borrowed floor space, it was a movement. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. But the real climax happened last Friday, the day Ridgeview Mall's parent company announced bankruptcy. Storefronts shuttered like dominoes until only a skeleton crew of retailers remained. I sat in a boardroom overlooking that same atrium where Tessa once laughed. The mall's creditors needed a miracle. I offered one. Using retained earnings and a strategic loan, Threadlight purchased the entire property. We would transform Ridgeview into the artisan exchange, part retail collective, part makerspace, part community hub. Tenants would include ceramicists, woodworkers, indie fashion labels, people once relegated to craft fairs and side hustles. Contracts were signed. Escrow closed yesterday. Which brings me back to Tessa, Jenna, and Brooke walking through the doors in disbelief. Jenna's jaw dropped. Brooke muttered, "Is that Emily?" Tessa tried to muster a smile. I set down my ribbon bouquet and walked toward them, heart steady. "Welcome to Threadlight," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Can I help you find anything?" They blinked, speechless. And in that hush, thicker than any mall silence, I forgave them. Not because they asked, but because forgiveness felt like the final stitch in a tapestry I'd spent a decade weaving. I turned away, leaving them to wander under chandeliers that bore my logo, past shelves labeled hand-stitched by Nor, designed by Liam, and a framed portrait of Grandma Ruth with the caption, "Play big, even when you feel small." And as the sliding doors breathed open for the next wave of customers, I knew the little Etsy hobby they once mocked had become a sanctuary for dreamers everywhere, proof that small beginnings can fill an entire mall with light. Later that evening, after the grand reopening crowds thinned and the scent of lavender eucalyptus cleaner drifted through echoing corridors that no longer felt haunted by vacancy, I locked up the atrium storefronts and climbed the escalator to the second floor, the one that still carried phantom music from its department store past. I needed a moment alone with the building, with its ribs of concrete and glass now beating to my pulse. I traced my fingers along the bronze railing and remembered hauling crates of canvas totes up these steps during construction, breath fogging in the January chill, palms raw and hopeful. Back then I could barely afford plywood shelving. Now, digital billboards outside blazed Threadlight in 12-foot letters like a sunrise no one could ignore. Under the skylight, moonlight pooled onto the terrazzo tile, silvering flecks of quartz. That's when I heard soft footsteps. Turning, I saw Dad, 63, hair gone mostly gray, shoulders rounded by 3 decades at the auto plant. He'd driven 3 hours from Westbrook without telling me. For years he'd kept his distance, not out of malice but from a quiet fear that he'd break something fragile in my dream. Tonight he stood smiling at the vastness he never imagined his daughter could command. "Thought you might need help turning off the lights," he said, voice gruff the way it gets when emotion swells behind Midwestern stoicism. We walked the concourse together, switching off track lights one bank at a time. Click, my childhood insecurities dimmed. Click, the nights I stitched until dawn faded. Click, the echo of Tessa's laughter dissolved. By the time we reached the last circuit, darkness felt gentle, like velvet drawn across a theater just before the film starts. In that hush, Dad cleared his throat. "I used to worry," he admitted. "Not because I thought you'd fail, because I didn't know where I fit if you flew higher than anything I understood." I swallowed the knot in my throat. "You fit right here," I whispered, pressing his calloused hand to the banister we'd restored together. He chuckled. "Place is so big I got lost twice looking for you." Then, softer, "Your mom would be proud." The words hit me like church bells, deep, resonant, impossible to ignore. Mom's disappearance from our lives had always been the fracture beneath my success, a hairline crack I papered over with ambition. Tonight, under skylight shadows, that fracture felt less like a weakness and more like the grain in strong wood, the character, not flaw. We descended the escalator in mutual silence, lights winking out behind us like constellations going to sleep. When we stepped outside, the parking lot lamps haloed the empty asphalt. I hugged Dad, breathing in the scent of motor oil and peppermint gum. He drove away, taillights twin rubies moving into night, and I stood alone beneath the Threadlight sign, its glow painting my reflection onto the glass doors, a woman equal parts seamstress, CEO, and daughter learning to let love back in. The following weeks blurred into meetings with architects, city council presentations, and endless coffee-fueled spreadsheets forecasting foot traffic lift for the Artisan Exchange. I hired a community relations director, Tanvi Shah, whose passion for equitable retail spaces matched my own. Together we designed scholarship booths where teenagers could sell their first creations rent-free. We negotiated with farmers market collectives for weekend pop-ups, curated spoken-word nights in the old food court mezzanine, and planned rooftop herb gardens that would supply ingredients to a zero-waste cafe on level 3. But success, I'd learned, is a bright light that also casts long shadows. 2 months after the purchase, an anonymous Instagram account started posting photos of our loading docks with captions implying unsafe working conditions. The photos were staged, ragged gloves tossed near a dumpster, a broken pallet propped against a fire exit, yet the images spread faster than truth. Local news demanded statements. Investors called at midnight. My heartbeat quickened in the old familiar way, the fear of losing everything just when it finally felt secure. But this time, I refused to shrink. We installed transparent live streams from our workshop floor, invited journalists for unannounced tours, and published payroll data showing living wage commitments. Within days, support poured in, customers posted selfies with #ThreadlightTruth, and the smear campaign fizzled like a wet match. Surveillance footage eventually revealed the saboteur. the regional manager of that fast fashion chain whose kiosk once complained about aisle congestion. Karma, apparently, favored artisans. Still, the incident unearthed a deeper vulnerability in me. The whisper that said you're still that girl refreshing Etsy notifications at 2 a.m., praying someone will believe in you. I confided this to Noor one late evening as we sorted color swatches under warm pendant lamps. She threaded an indigo yarn through her fingers and said, "Emily, in my culture a tapestry is strongest at the intersections, the knots where threads meet tension. Those knots are your fears. Without them, the fabric unravels." Her words settled over me like a quilt. Perhaps resilience wasn't the absence of fear but the weaving of it into patterns both beautiful and strong. Spring arrived with a flourish of cherry blossoms lining the mall's walkway. On opening day of the Artisan Exchange, dancers from the local arts high school performed between stalls, their movements echoing loom shuttles and paint strokes. Elderly potters spun clay beside teenage jewelry makers. A retired engineer demonstrated 3D printed prosthetic parts next to a booth selling hand-poured soy candles. Children painted kindness rocks to leave in city parks. I watched from the balcony, tears blurring the mosaic of color and hope below. Somewhere in that hum of creativity, I felt Mom's spirit, Grandma's steady faith, Dad's cautious pride. The hum stitched them all together. Yet life has a way of testing new seams. 3 days after the launch, Grandma Ruth suffered a stroke. I flew to Westbrook under a storm-gray sky, the private jet offered by our lead investor feeling absurdly luxurious as grief pooled in my gut. In the hospital room, machines beeped like metronomes while Grandma's fingers, once nimble with knitting needles, lay still against white linens. I held her hand and whispered updates. The rooftop garden's first basil sprouted. Liam's designing a biodegradable shipping liner. Dad learned to use Instagram and posted your cinnamon roll recipe. Her eyelids fluttered. I swear she tilted her head at the mention of Dad's newfound social media fame. That night, I opened my laptop beside her bed and drafted the Ruth Carter Maker Grant, a $10,000 annual award for women over 60 launching creative ventures. I hit save just as dawn brushed the window with coral light. Grandma passed 2 hours later, peacefully, as if she'd waited for the grant to exist before letting go. The funeral drew artisans from every city we'd touched. They lined the church steps holding tools of their crafts, paintbrushes, chisels, embroidery hoops, raised in silent salute. Brooke, surprisingly, sent flowers with a note, "Thank you for teaching us what real success looks like." I believed her. Grief became my loom. I wove it into expansion plans. We opened Artisan Exchange satellites in 4 additional malls, each one saving a dying retail center by flooding it with human stories instead of cheap trends. At the ribbon cutting in Phoenix, a Navajo weaver presented me with a rug patterned in blazing oranges and cool turquoise. She said, "You gave us walls, we'll give you horizons." Budgets ballooned, supply chains stretched, and suddenly I was negotiating fair trade hemp imports from Bangladesh at 3 a.m. while sipping chamomile so strong it could have revived the dead. I learned acronyms for everything, ESG, KPI, SKU, and hired a COO, Marcus Liu, to keep the alphabet soup from boiling over. Yet amid spreadsheets and site visits, I craved the whisper of fabric beneath my own fingertips. One stormy Thursday, I slipped into the Cincinnati storefront unannounced, donned an apron, and spent 6 hours teaching a mother-daughter duo how to embroider a sunflower onto denim. When the girl, Avery, pulled the final stitch and gasped at her handiwork, I felt electricity arc from my heart to the needle. It reminded me why this empire existed, not for quarterly returns but for sparks that kindle confidence in quiet people. Walking out, rain pattering the glass, I recorded a quick reel. If this tiny bloom just lit you up, share your first craft memory below. Let's fill the comments with creativity. I posted it before remembering I'd already used all 4 allotted calls to action. I laughed at myself and let it stay anyway. Rules matter, but so does spontaneity. Media attention mounted. A streaming service greenlit a documentary series titled From Etsy to Empire, cameras trailing me through airports and incubator pitches. At first I felt self-conscious, Who was I to merit a film crew? But the episodes highlighted artisans' journeys, Noor balancing motherhood and crochet patterns, Liam launching a graphic design mentoring program for queer youth, Tanvi navigating city permits to host refugee-led pop-ups. Watching rough cuts made my chest ache with pride. Of course, documentaries need tension. Producers pushed for a personal life angle, asking about romance I'd deftly avoided discussing. Truth was, I'd been so busy sewing a global fabric I'd neglected the stitches of intimacy. The last relationship I'd had, Alex, a landscape architect, ended when I missed his sister's wedding to finalize a supply chain audit in Vietnam. We parted kindly but firmly. Still, the void remained. One evening, after yet another take of me walking purposefully down a corridor, the cinematographer, Caleb Martin, tall, quiet, observant, handed me a cup of jasmine tea and said, "Your story's beautiful, but don't let them edit out your own heart." His words lodged somewhere vulnerable. Over the next weeks, we talked between shots about light ratios and childhood libraries, about how success can sometimes echo like an empty theater after the audience leaves. I felt a warmth I hadn't permitted in years. Whether love or friendship, I didn't yet know, but the possibility itself was novel and shimmering. The first major crack in the expansion came not from rivals or rumors, but from global shipping chaos. A blockage at the Panama Canal delayed our sustainable cotton deliveries. Shelves went half empty, backorder emails stacked up, and social media buzzed with disappointment. My anxiety spiked so high I dreamed of drowning in packing peanuts. We pivoted, fast. Local sourcing task forces, emergency maker collaboratives, pop-up repair bars where customers could refresh older Threadlight pieces instead of buying new. The crisis morphed into a showcase of resilience and circular economy. By month's end, revenue not only rebounded but customer loyalty metrics hit record highs. It reinforced the lesson Noor once shared: tension can strengthen the weave. Tonight, I'm writing this under the glow of my office pendant lamp, the store below humming as artisans close up. Dad texts me a photo of Mom's old sewing kit he found in the attic, wooden spools, a thimble dented at the crown, a faded receipt for muslin bought the year before she left. The image slices through me, evidence that creativity was her legacy too, even if she abandoned everything else. I don't know if I'll ever understand her disappearance, but I see now that her absence opened a space Grandma rushed to fill, that Dad and I learned to talk through the language of perseverance, that I was forged in an alloy of loss and love. And maybe, just maybe, Threadlight is less my company than it is a conversation among generations, each stitch a sentence in a dialogue that refuses to end. Caleb texts next, balcony shot looked gorgeous. Fancy grabbing coffee before the 6 a.m. call? I smile at the absurdity of coffee before dawn, yet my thumbs type yes almost of their own accord. Maybe the next chapter of this narrative won't involve revenge or vindication but something quieter, healing, partnership, the bravery of setting down the needle long enough to hold someone's hand. If you're still listening, viewer, still breathing in the cadence of my journey, know this: the world will label your dreams hobbies until the echo of your determination fills an entire mall. Let them laugh. Let them doubt. Then weave the doubt into your tapestry, it will only make the colors deeper. And when the day comes that you stand beneath a sign blazing your name in neon, remember the moment you first believed you deserved it, because that was the true beginning, the first invisible stitch that held everything else together. The janitorial staff just flipped off the last corridor light. I need to lock up. Tomorrow, we announce the Ruth Carter Maker Grant live on national morning television. I can already hear Grandma's chuckle, play big, Emmy. I intend to woo bigger than ever, but also slower, kinder, stitched with room for breaths and midnight jasmine tea and maybe, finally, love. For now, I close my laptop, slip on my coat, and step into the darkness of the empty atrium. The automatic lights follow me out, one by one, like good sentinels ensuring I leave with the quiet reassurance that everything built today will still stand tomorrow. Outside, the night air is cool, the sky a vast bolt of indigo fabric scattered with stars. And somewhere inside me, a young girl with a little Etsy hobby looks up at those stars and whispers, "We did it."